So there's a misconception that if you're single, you are incomplete, perhaps damaged, salvaged, and you won't be happy until you find your one. And that is not true. That is bullshit. It is a message that has been fed to us by media and advertising. The truth is, when you're single, you have the richest soil for growth. That's why I created this podcast. And unlike other podcasts, this one is host-driven, not guest-driven. That means I will be rotating health and wellness experts 3 times a week to give you the giant box of wellness crayons, not just the primary colors, so you can start building a meaningful life. It's time to give singlehood a cape. So the host of today's episode, I met through Vanessa, my partner. And she's disclosed this on her podcast and social media, so I will as well. These were the catalysts in her life early years. So Ashley was her therapist, and she also did sessions with Ashley's husband, Lair. So I thought it was interesting to bring them on as host/contributors because they were just such a powerful part of Vanessa's story, and I know they will be for you as well. Okay, Lair Torrent is the author of the book, The Practice of Love, Break Old Patterns, Rebuild Trust, and Create a Connection That Lasts. He is a leading marriage family therapist and a mindfulness-based relationship therapist. A daily OM bestselling author and a contributing columnist at Inc.com. He has been resourced and interviewed by such notable news outlets and publications as NPR, Rolling Stone, The New York Times, and a host of podcasts and radio shows. He is the co-host of the Not Your Mama's Therapy podcast and can be found on Instagram at Lair Torrent, Torrent, holistic therapist. And his wife, Ashley Torrent, is a psycho-spiritual therapist, intuitive medium, and spiritual teacher. She sees both individual and couples, offers intuitive readings, teaches classes in spiritual mediumship, and is a co-host of the Blue Butterfly Effect podcast, which aims to ground spirituality and explore personal transformation. Ashley believes that as spiritual beings, we are all mediums, channels, and energy healers, but have forgotten our true nature and how to use these innate gifts. She also believes, based on her personal experience as a complex trauma survivor and practitioner, that true healing occurs when we weave together psychological understanding and spiritual practice. She can be found on Instagram at Ashley Torrent, Torrent 29. I hope you enjoy this episode with Lair and Ashley.
Well, hey, everybody, and welcome to the Single on Purpose podcast. Today, your hosts in the ever-revolving carousel of hosts for Single on Purpose are myself, Lair Torrent, licensed marriage and family therapist, and my lovely wife, Ashley Torrent, also a therapist and a medium. That's right, she talks to dead people in her spare time.
Yes.
There's outside noise. We are also the hosts of the podcast called The Practice of Love, and you can see the book back there on the wall. Today, what are we talking about, Ash?
We are talking about competition, comparison, and our inner genius.
That's right. Competition, comparison, and our inner genius. I think competition is inherent, endemic. It's part of our culture. Certainly as a capitalistic culture, we are taught that to compete for everything with everyone is a good. And I think today what we may find out that competition at large may not always be the best, and comparison might not always be the best. And I know that that's sort of sacrilege in our Americanized culture, where we're taught to compete for everything, including with our partners. Dovetail and cover some of that. But let's go ahead and jump into the idea of competition, comparison. What are your thoughts?
Well, I thought we should start with competition because you really spoke to this in your book and you believe there is no competition really. And so I thought it might be good for you to flesh out where you came across that idea, because it really gave me a pause to think about.
Well, I feel like there is competition but I don't think it should be there. Certainly not between partners, right? And that if there is any level of competition, whether you are fighting for the victim position in your relationship or you're fighting to win an argument, the idea is that in order for there to be a victor, there of course must be a victim or someone who's been vanquished, is what I said in the book. And that does not breed warm and loving feelings. And if partners are in constant competition, if they're constantly vying for whatever it might be between them, then the energy between you is ultimately not going to be a connective and loving one. And if we're not careful, that can get away from us. But I think we're also going to be talking about comparison and competition broadly as we experience it as single people as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that someone asked me when you were writing your book, and again, I share this even if you're not in a relationship, but I think it's important whether you're in a friendship or a partnership. A friend of mine who knows that I write asked me if I was jealous of your book deal. And my response was like, no. And she was like, how can you not be jealous of her book deal? And she's a writer as well. And I said, well, he hasn't done the work. I haven't done the work. I didn't write the book proposal. I didn't sit down and write the book. I didn't approach an agent or a publisher. So for me, there wasn't anything to be jealous of. I was really more than anything excited for you. And I think this is something that I notice in my clients. I've seen it in myself as well, that when someone has a success, even though I wasn't like this for you in that moment, but when someone has success or is doing something that maybe you long to do, or maybe living a life that looks better for you, and we see this so often in social media, you see the best version of people on social media, not the version they want you to see. It's a curated vision. But I think what we automatically often go to is the deficit within ourselves, that we're not enough, we're not doing enough, we're maybe a loser. I mean, I notice so many people go on social media and they come out just feeling so low because they've gone through so many different pictures and posts about other people. And one of the things I think is important to remember, that everything you see creates a feeling in you. And a thought, and thoughts create feelings. So everything you see creates a reaction. And before you know it, you've been scrolling for 15 minutes. Sometimes people go on for an hour. You've ridden a roller coaster of emotions. And I know a lot of people come out of that feeling just discombobulated.
Well, I think that doing the social media scroll can, if we're not mindfully going into that social media scroll and looking at what other people say they're doing, again, like you said, probably putting a spit shine on it, that very often what we don't understand is we're building perhaps a narrative. And so I encourage people that if you're going to go in, know what you're going in to get, and that you may come out with not a great feeling about yourself. And you have to be very, very aware of how you interact with social media, or not just social media, but, when you hear of people getting things and doing things that you want to get and do. I think it's human nature to go to that place of deficit and, what about me? And what I think we find is that there is a part of competition that can catapult us, that can push us into, well, if I want those things, then I need to double down, work harder, do those things. And perhaps some of that is good, but by and large, it can be a great motivator. Yeah. But if you fall into or slide over from motivation to maybe taking yourself apart or judging yourself harshly, then that's obviously going to steal so much of that zeal to go and get that thing, and you're going to start forming a narrative about yourself about how you're not enough.
Yeah, and you'll collapse under it. I mean, the weight of it can make someone collapse. And, the thing I've learned a lot this year as someone who, and I'm using social media as an example because it's just right at our fingertips. And so many people are on it for many different reasons. But I wasn't on social media till a little over a year ago. And getting into it for my work was shocking. I had dipped in, but me, you were like, I was never on it.
No,
and I was very peaceful.
Yeah,
I was so peaceful.
You were much more peaceful then.
But I got into it for work and wanting to connect with people, and also to promote, classes and things that I was doing. And what I found is I started to forget about my own process. I started to feel that I was behind, looking at my age. I'm behind. I'm not doing enough, seeing how often people post. I started comparing myself to those people. And what I forgot is, what'd you say?
How few followers I have. Yeah.
All of it. And what I forgot is that I am an individual with my own way of moving through the world. I move at my own pace. I'm very introverted. But during this time, I wasn't taking any of those things into account. I wasn't being compassionate with myself. I was getting kind of caught up in, because I can go into self-criticism very easily. So I wasn't enough. And what I've came to remember a year later was that, like, we're all on our own paths and we have to navigate these things, what feels natural to us. And if it doesn't feel natural to us, then the energy behind whatever we're doing isn't going to be authentic. We're not going to be producing things that feel in line with who we are, and maybe sometimes in integrity. Mm-hmm. So I've really come to appreciate that. I remember seeing this post the other day. This woman said, if you see something that someone else has or something's doing, rather than go to competition or comparison, maybe say thank you. Thank you for showing me what's possible. And I just love that. I really love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I wrote in the book, talking about not just, couples who compete with one another, which I think can be, as I said, not a very healthy practice for a partnership. But as we begin to look and quite naturally and compare ourselves to other people. And so I have a lot of, as you know, I have a lot of like Broadway dancers in my practice. I have a lot of performers, and there's a ton of competition within the field of performing. Everyone's sort of trying to outgun. It's a big pissing contest, really. And for those people who come to me who are having a difficult time booking jobs and having a difficult time, in their career, the first thing I ask them is, are you looking to your left and to your right when you're dancing? And I'm like, what do you mean? Are you looking to your left and looking to your right, comparing yourself to the dancer next to you? And they're like, well, of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? Because I am competing again. And sure, an argument can be made that you are actually competing for that job. But what I also tell them is, look, if you are constantly looking at the other person, comparing yourself to them, you may find your excellence, right? You may dance excellently. You may perform in an excellent fashion, but you'll never find your inner genius, right? And it's those people who work all the time, those people who are, as they say in the colloquial of our time, like, oh, they're just playing another game. I think of people like Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, those people who have reached this pinnacle of the pinnacle of the sport or the pinnacle of anything that they're doing. Very often they will be referred to as playing another game. And that's because by and large, they've stopped competing with everybody else and they are actually competing with themselves or trying to be the best version of themselves. And I think that if we are comparing ourselves to other people, we are stealing ourselves of the opportunity to find that inner genius.
And whatever we're trying to do, we end up doing it for the wrong reasons, to keep up with everybody, rather than the initial reason we started is that it probably brings us joy or it's something we're passionate about. Right now I'm teaching myself to draw, something, I've always wanted to do. And as I do it, I'm looking at YouTube videos and I'm looking at this woman draw so effortlessly. And I feel so frustrated at times. But what I've learned to come back to, and I'm so grateful that I'm doing it now in this stage of my life, is I know after everything that I've done, whether it was learning to surf or like learning to understand how horses communicate or be a therapist or a medium, I always find my own way. And I have to appreciate that own way, that it's mine and it won't look like anyone else's. I was even looking at this woman's hand position, how she was drawing flowers. And I was like, but I don't hold my pen like that. So I have to find a way of creating these beautiful flower doodles, but holding the pen the way I hold it, not trying to match her movement.
Well, you bring up kind of an interesting point for me, and that is that, and maybe it's just for me, that when I find myself in competition with someone, it's like in my zeal to vanquish or to be better than, I cease to learn from them.
Right.
Right. And everyone can be a mirror, a guru, a teacher on the road of life in whatever area you are operating in. But the moment I start, and I don't know if this is true for you, but the moment I start comparing myself and I want to win, whatever that means, do better than, there is that part of me that I'm not particularly proud of. I know that I stop allowing that person to teach me. And I think everyone has something that they can show you. And so, this also plays into our ego.
Mm-hmm.
And vanquishing the ego and pulling ego out allows us to stop, look at what that person is doing and go, let's take a look at how they got there. Maybe there's something I can actually learn from them. But if I'm not doing that, I'm not learning anything from them because I'm solely focused on the end result and not the journey to get there.
Well, that's such a good point. It's finding your own way of doing it, but also learning what you can from the person who knows how to do that. Mm-hmm. Like, just this woman's attitude as she's drawing is she's just in flow and she's like easy peasy basically and using this just flowery language. And I'm listening to her and it's her energy about doing this thing that's so at ease. And it reminds me to be at ease, reminds me to go with the flow. And that's what I want to learn from her.
And I also feel like when we adopt that, when we go into comparison, we go into competition, we go into a deficit perspective.
Yeah.
Right. And when I'm coaching people through anything that they're trying to attain, right, very quickly we get to, well, there's only one seat, or there's only, one person to, I see it a lot when people are trying to date, right? There is this contracted sort of deficit perspective, and you hear, well, there's no good men in New York, and there's no good men in Charleston, or good women in this particular part of the world. And it's like, that's not actually true. That when we can adopt a less contracted narrative around so many things, and when we drift away from competition and come back to our intrinsic goodness, right? Like when we come back to what we bring to the table in any given situation, and we start taking account of those things that are so great within us, then we come from an abundance perspective.
Yes.
Right. And the energy of abundance. It's so compelling and it's so attractive that I think, and I don't want to be, too Pollyannish, but the more I know, for me, the more I've moved away from competition and trying to vanquish everybody else, and moved into an abundance perspective and an allowance of like, there is enough room. There is plenty of space. There are actually enough of whatever it is that I'm trying to get. And I know people will argue with me on that, but the closer I get to having the experience of that thing. Right. And everywhere where I've adopted that, I've gotten very, very close, if not the thing.
You might have gotten a different version of that thing than you imagine. I mean, I think that's the beauty of what's possible is it may not look exactly what you thought you wanted, but usually what you end up getting is something more beautiful. And I think that gratitude and appreciation for your own gifts and your own process and for your teacher leads us to a place of, and I totally lost where I was going, but I'm going to find it back. Well, not only does that abundance lead us to a place of sympathetic joy, which I think is so important, sympathetic joy for the other person. This idea that when we see someone doing something amazing that we really respect and admire, rather than going to a deficit perspective, we feel joy for that person. What would that be like? Mm-hmm. What would it be like to be like, I'm so happy for them?
Right.
And just knowing that there's enough. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The other thing that you and I live by most often this year, I feel like we've been tested in this idea, but most often we live in a world where rules don't apply. So when you're in competition and you're in a scarcity,
yes, I like that. That's right.
Feelings of scarcity, then there's a limited amount of what's available to you. And there's a limited way of how to get it. And you and I have often said we don't live by those rules of engagement, just because someone says you have to do this to get a publisher and agent. You went rogue and found your own way. Mm-hmm. We've done that in most things in our life.
So just keep having to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think it's so woven into the fine fabric of who we are, and certainly of who I am, to compete, to see my deficit rather than my abundance, right? I'm constantly encouraging my clients. I'm like, you're constantly looking at all the things you have not done. How often do you stop, look back, and go, wow, look at the amazing things I have done, right? And this is where gratitude practice comes in. It can be such an amazing practice if you can do it, because it does remind us often, if we do it enough, of all of the things we've done. So we come from that abundance perspective, and very often we can take it with us. And I'm constantly having to remind myself that there is enough. Yeah. Even in those places where we're taught there is not enough, there is actually enough. And when we hold that as a truth, and it's a stupid example, but I remember when we first moved to Charleston, and we had been invited to this like jazz on the green in this local park, right? And we hadn't been here very long. And so we're getting the stroller ready, and, the blankets and the wine and the cheese and all the things. And I'm going, come on. It's 6:00. We got to get there if we're going to get a spot. And
coming from New York City.
Yeah. Well, right. Again, you're telling the end of the story before.
Whoops.
Yeah. Thank you. So as I was going to say, we had come from New York City, where there is often a deficit of seats at any one thing. I mean, places on the lawn at the Jazz Fest in the park, right? There is often a feeling of lack there because there's so many people in so little space. But even in that place, I worked it out where I could create a sense of abundance within me that manifested itself in my life. And that started with not competing with every other New Yorker for every other thing. And so when we got to the park in Charleston, it was like the gates of Shangri-La had opened up, and it was like, of course, come, there's plenty of space for everyone. And that was like one of those life moments where I felt like life was showing me, like, slow down, take a breath. Not everything needs to be a race. Not everything needs to be a competition. You have to compete for space on the lawn next to this family. There's going to be plenty if you open yourself up to the possibility that there is enough.
Right. It's a game changer. It's a different mindset, and when you're in comparison competition, you're operating from a deficit right out of the gate, rather than a place of sympathetic joy, appreciation, gratitude. And what you said about reflection of where you've been, that's something else I learned this year. I had to say, when I was being hard on myself, wait a minute, look at where you've come from. Look at the reasons you weren't on social media, which were a lot of trauma-based reasons. And look at the fact that you're courageous enough to put yourself out there now. That fear is not controlling this experience. And then look at the things you have created in this time. And when I would do that, it was like I could take a breath and I could come back to the present moment, and, my ego would fall away, and I would come back to a space of love within inside myself. And it's just a spaciousness of there is enough, and I am enough.
Yeah, and I almost forgot the story. I'm always with the stories, but I like telling stories. So
you're this one, when you're not interrupted.
Well, yeah, when people don't tell the end of the story. So I'm in grad school, and it's towards the end of grad school, and we had a substitute professor in. It was a very small class, and I think they were looking for something to do and something to talk about. So this particular professor had us go around the room. They went around the room, and everyone had to say once, because we're getting close to licensure, once you're licensed, what are you going to do with your license? And everyone kind of followed the company line and was like, well, I'm going to go work in a drug rehabilitation center, or, whatever it was. No one was saying what they were actually going to try to do, which is go into private practice. But when it came time for me, of course, being the fart in the elevator that I tend to be, I said, I'm going to start a small private practice in the East Village. I'm going to have a sliding scale fee where I can see people who can pay my top fee, and I can also see people who can't afford this echelon of therapy. And I sort of went into what I was going to do to build this practice out and how many clients I wanted to see. And I was kind of dreaming it up, and I was getting kind of excited. And this person then turned to me and said, really? Is that what you're going to do? He said, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take the zip code that you live in New York City, or wherever your office is going to be. He's like, I want you to go to Psychology Today, and I want you to punch that in, and I want you to see how many therapists there are in your zip code, and then tell me about your private practice. And I was like, yeah, exactly.
The reaction
I
in
was,
my body to this story is just, it
I was,
contracts you.
I was, but at the same time, I went and did it like an idiot. I went and did it. I'm going to do that.
Thousands of people at the time we started our practice in the East Village,
Oh my
thousands
God,
of therapists.
thousands of them, right?
We're not joking. Thousands. Like around the corner, down the street,
Look,
in the building
let's
next door.
be truthful. New Yorkers have therapists like most people have winter coats, right? You've got
Yeah.
at least one.
Yeah.
And so I started to sweat. Like I started to sweat profusely. Like I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Right?
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten us in this debt. I've spent all this time, all this energy, all this money. And there's a very good chance based on this schmoes, challenge to me that this isn't going to work.
Right.
And then I took a breath. I stepped back. I was like, okay, this is his narrative. This is his story, right? He's doing what he's doing because perhaps his private practice didn't work for him.
Right.
And I can't adopt that narrative. And so I did this thing. I was like, I'm just going to lean back. I lean back into my goodness, right? That's the way I described it when I talk about it to my clients. It's this experience, right? I lean back into what I knew about myself as a clinician and the thing the goodness that I wanted to create in the world, which was full of abundance and was not full of his contracted nature at all.
No.
Right. And I went forth from that space of abundance and of not competing. I'm not competing with this person because I thought to myself, listen, if you and I are selling ball bearings on the same strip mall, right, we'd be selling the same exact ball bearings, but we're selling them in a very, very different fashion. Mm-hmm. And as silly, as stupid as that example is, it's like creating a therapy practice or creating anything in your life. If you're not looking to your left and looking to your right, comparing yourself to the other guy and really stepping into what it is that makes you special, there is no competition.
No.
There is no comparing. And so I thought to myself,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And I thought to myself, so yes, I am a licensed therapist and there's thousands of them quite literally in this square block or in this square mile radius, but we are not doing the same thing. And it was from that space, I'm convinced to this day, it's why my practice and quite frankly, yours has always thrived. And we've never had a problem with having enough clients. It's because we've always bought into our abundance. We've never competed with other therapists.
And I had the completely different experience with my supervisor and teacher. He said, don't even look at the amount of therapists in your area. Just focus on creating your practice. And I remember thinking that's what I'm going to do. And it's true when you think about who we are as individuals, we are offering something completely different. And something I wanted to share, because I like to bring the spiritual piece in and because I'm a medium, I was channeling the other day with my group, and when you channel, I'm in an altered state, receiving information from like the collective higher love energy, which you can call spirit, God, universe. I call it spirit. And a message came through that was so beautiful. It was like, imagine that each of you is part of a choir and each of you have your part to play. And in a choir, you have the soprano, the alto, the second soprano. I was in a female choir, so I don't remember all the male parts and all the other person's parts.
Points made. We got it.
But I remember I was an alto. And so I had what'd you say?
I said, points made. We got it. We know where you're going. Yep. Following along.
So I was an alto, and which is a very hard part to sing in a choir because I was one of the only altos. So you're singing the lowest version, while the sopranos are singing the fun, high, bouncy versions of the song as I see it. But I remember when I was hearing this message, that I was the unique individual expression of that alto in that choir. And as we are a group, if you think of the collective, I do believe we all come in to this world with a unique purpose, whatever that is. It's some way of service, whether it could be a teacher, a healer, a therapist. It could be someone who cooks food. It could be someone who grows food. It doesn't matter. The point being is that when we're trying to step out of that unique purpose and be something other than we're not playing that role that harmonizes with the collective. And so the message is that playing your role and being in integrity and in alignment with your soul, living through that purpose, you learn to harmonize with the collective to create this beautiful experience. And so as an alto, I couldn't compare myself to a second soprano because I can't sing second soprano very well.
Right.
But I had to appreciate my alto version. And so what I'm saying is I'm really learning to appreciate, like we did when we were building our practice, what it is we have to offer.
That's special, something that you have to offer. Yeah. Yet as you're saying that, it makes me think to myself, like, we get further and further away from our soul's purpose the more we compare and try and vanquish the other. I think that, like, I'm not saying you can't have a spirited game of Scrabble, but there is something to the idea that in order for there to be a victor, there must be the vanquished, and that if we are comparing ourselves too much, then, as you're saying in this particular example, I think it's like it does take us further and further away from our soul's path, and that's a big deal if you think about it like that. That we are here on a unique journey, trying to put our unique thumbprint on whatever it is that we're doing. And it's important to make sure that we not only find our excellence in that, and maybe competition takes us a little ways there, but our inner genius only comes through dropping into ourselves and figuring out what our unique purpose is and coming from that abundant place. And so, in keeping with how we tend to end our podcasts of the practice of love, how do the practices dovetail into this? What are your thoughts?
Mindfulness, for sure. It's being aware of when you've slipped into suffering or slipped in listening to the ego, comparing. Competition, like you said, it could be a great motivator, but when it's slipped in wishing, like ill will, or that person wishing they weren't doing as well, or being angry at them, or even gutting yourself because you're not good enough, mindfully watching, like, can you be in a space of noticing without going too far into suffering? So mindfulness brings us back to, okay, I'm a unique individual, an expression. How do I want to use what I have? How do I want to be on my path? At what pace do I want to move on? Mindfulness keeps us in alignment.
That's right. I think parts, like looking at what part of it shows up, right? And is it a part of us is like our inner critic that criticizes others and maybe criticizes ourselves? If we show up in a part of us that feels not enough, that can be a really important thing to look at, and to try and find our most authentic side of self, the side of us that can see our gifts and look at our abundance and not come from that contracted side of things. But also looking at the narrative, like, what's the story you're telling about yourself? Right? Are you telling a story of less than? I'm not enough. I can't do that. If I bought into that professor's narrative about being a therapist, maybe I'd be teaching someplace. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It just wasn't my dream. And it obviously wasn't his. But I almost adopted his narrative and said, so your point to mindfulness, being aware of the part of us that shows up to whatever it is that we're trying to do, or trying to create, trying to attain, is that a part that's judgy? And what's the story we're telling about ourselves in that space?
And then, one of my favorites, especially lately, is personal responsibility, which you talk a lot in the book. It's the 5th practice, is that I am responsible for how I'm showing up to what it is I want to do. I'm responsible for how I'm talking to myself. I'm responsible for what I put out into the world when I see others doing well. I'm responsible for keeping myself in alignment and on track. I'm responsible for how I express myself in those moments. Do I put out jealousy and other things into the world, or do I, not bypassing what you feel, but seeing if you can come to something different? I'm responsible for what I put out into the world and how I put it out there.
Yes. And your ego, you're personally responsible for,
responsible for keeping an eye on my ego. Yeah. Acting through fear or love.
Well, I think we're about at time. Anything else you want to say? Anything you want to plug before we go?
You can also find me on the Blue Butterfly Effect podcast with Millie Murillo, and we are having an upcoming retreat with Danae and Vanessa. It will be announced, I believe, in the middle of this month in January, and the retreat's in Costa Rica. What'd you say?
Danae Long and Vanessa Bennett.
Logan
now, right?
Danae Logan and Vanessa Bennett, yes.
Right. Oh, okay. Sorry.
And what about you?
So I am going to be at a retreat in Portugal in May, and you can find that. Uh, you can find a link to that in my link tree on my Instagram at Lair Torrent Holistic Therapist, and you can also pick up the book The Practice of Love, which is ostensibly a book about couples and relationship, but really these practices are, as we're finding out, really applicable to all areas of life. And that book is available anywhere finer books are sold.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Thanks for the chat.
See you later. Thank you. Bye.
I hope that episode was helpful. Hey, listen, if you want to share your singlehood journey, if you've gone somewhere and come back, if you have revelations and wisdom, please share your story. It's going to help other people. Nothing makes us feel more connected than hearing other people's stories. So just send me the audio of your story, and you could just record it directly from your phone and email it to theangrytherapist@gmail.com. Also, if you want our Single on Purpose newsletter, go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life. You will get tools and articles and other people's stories, and also Zoom links to private gathers. So if you want to join our community, go to singleonpurpose.life. Thank you for listening. Be well. We hope you tell a friend. Hey, before you go, I want to invite you to the Single on Purpose private community online. It's off of social media, no ads, no algorithms. We got forums, we got live groups, we got webinars, and we have social hangs. We also have offline in-person hangs happening soon. So check us out. Go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life, and I will see you inside.